Ephesians 2, please. Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2 and verse 14 through the end of the chapter. This is where we are. It's where we'll be. Ephesians 2, verses 14 through 22. Before we dig in, let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that you give us tonight to study your word. We're thankful for this opportunity to gather around with each other. We're thankful for the time to remind each other what this life is all about, who we serve, and why we serve you. Father, we pray you'd be with our shepherds as they're watching over us. Watch over all of us as we're trying to make application of your word in our daily lives to better serve you. Father, please give us opportunities to bring this good news to the world around us that is encroached in sin and darkness. That we can be the light in the world as Russ preached on Sunday night this past Sunday. Father, pray that you'll be with us through our class hour this evening and all those in the back classes as well. Help us to make the right applications. We can truly be the light we should be. Father, pray you'd be with all those that are sick and afflicted and hurting right now. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Ephesians 2, verses 14 through 22. I'll say this now so that nobody takes offense later. I'm not going to shake your hands tonight. I feel fine. Okay. Boy, I already got dirty looks. I feel fine, but I didn't feel fine last night. So I'm going to wave at you. I might spit in your general direction. We want to share germs around here. No, but I am going to keep my distance. So, don't nobody get offended by it. That I'll wave at you and not shake your hand. Ephesians 2, verse 14. Let's read this text together. Ephesians 2, verses 14 through 22. For he himself is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of division between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace, and that he might reconcile them both to God in one body by the cross, by it having put to death the enmity. And he came and preached peace to you who were afar off, and to those who were near. For through him we both have access by one Spirit to the Father. Now therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God, and have been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together for a habitation of God in the Spirit. All right, let's work off of these questions here. This is question number 15. Question number 15, covering chapter 2. What does Paul say is our peace? Jesus. Jesus is our peace. So, what is one way Paul describes that here? Or maybe one way this happens. Verse 14. In what way, let me rephrase the question. Maybe that's a little convoluted. In what way is Jesus our peace from verse 14? Formerly lost. Okay, Galatians 3, yeah. In verse 14, he's tore down the wall that divides us. That's how he's our peace. Okay? That's another way of describing that. Question number 16. What are the two men and what is the one new man? Verse 15. What are the two men? Jews and the Gentiles, okay. So what's the one new man? Christians. The body, which is the church. That's chapter 1, isn't it? Very good. Question number 17. Through what are we reconciled? Jesus and the cross. Very good. Question number 18. What do we both have now through Him? This is verse 18. Access to the Father. Well, we'll say something on that in a second. Sometimes it's really hard to ask these questions and not make a comment or two, but I'm really trying my best to just ask the questions, and we'll make comments in a second. Question number 19. What are the different ways Paul uses to describe their new status in verse 19? Okay, no longer strangers, no longer aliens. Come on, somebody else. What's the other things he says there? Fellow citizens, saints, part of the household of God. Very good. Just kind of pay attention to that. It is Paul piling on synonyms, but each bite of cinnamon. This is not an advertisement for cereal. So each synonym carries its own particular nuance. Okay, and we'll address that when we come to that verse in a second. Question number 20. What does foundation of the apostles and prophets mean? Verse 20. This has been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. What is that referring to? Church? Maybe a little bit. It's verse 20. What's being built? Verse 20. And having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ Himself being the chief cornerstone. The gospel, I really think maybe it's open-ended, and you could understand that to be the gospel itself. You could understand that to be the church. It's all being built on this foundation. The foundation of the apostles and prophets is a reference to the things they've done, their lives and their preaching. So we might see what's being built, but really, what is it being built on? Well, it's being built on the bedrock of the gospel messages preached by these men. All right, and then the final question of actually chapter 2. Question number 21. What does the image of a holy temple suggest? Verses 21 and 22. The dwelling place of God. I'm not going to let y'all off the hook on this one. What are some other images that maybe come to mind from that one? The holy temple. Dwelling place of God, Dennis said. What's another one? So what are some other images that maybe come to mind? The tabernacle. Okay, so what do the tabernacle and the temple have in common? What are they? Places of God's residence, okay, places of God's dwelling, but what happens when man gets to the temple and tabernacle? What are they doing when they get there? They're worshiping. So a holy temple, it is the place where God dwells, is part of that image. It's a place of worship, is part of that image. Okay? But what's the word that's being used there? A holy temple. What does that suggest? Sanctification? Body of Christians, maybe a little bit. In that image, guys, you're having the quality of this product suggested. It's a holy temple. Holy, set apart, special, sanctified, separated. All things used to describe God Himself, all things used to describe the worship of God, all things used to describe God's people. Old people of Israel. We're supposed to be God's holy people, right? It's Exodus 19, Exodus 20, it's Leviticus 11, 44, and 45. We are called to the same thing today as New Testament Christians. We are a holy people, special and set apart for His purposes. Holy temple is really, really, really big imagery, okay? And it encompasses all of the things we just spent a few minutes talking about. God's dwelling place, the place of sacrifice, the place of worship, the place of holiness. All of those things come together in that image, okay? And I'll preach that sermon when we get there. Does anybody have any questions on that? On some of those questions? Anything that wasn't exactly answered the way you wanted it? Well, you're probably wrong, but it's okay. All right, let's work through this text together a little bit. Verse 14. Now, remembering, this feeds out of verses 11 and following. So verses 1 through 10 is in essence the bulk of what the gospel is and what the gospel is all about. Verse 11 through verse 13 is this beginning elaboration on the life before Jesus Christ. The time when they were without God, they were without Christ, they were Gentiles in every sense of the word, literally, physically, but also spiritually. They were separated from God. And so verse 12 describes some of that alienation, that separation. Verse 13, they were without God, they did not have Christ, they were brought near by the blood of Jesus. So verse 14, for He Himself is our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of division between us, having abolished in His flesh the enmity, that is the law of commandments contained in ordinances. And we'll pick that up in the middle of the thought in just a second. So verse 14, He is our peace. Remember in our introduction material we talked about, in the Roman world, Caesar was peace. Caesar was the one who gave peace. Caesar was the one who granted peace. Caesar was the one who secured peace. And there were ancient documents that even supported that. When you thought of peace, you thought of what the Roman Empire had done for the world. The Roman Empire had got the world peace. Paul says, no, sir. Real peace does not come through Nero. It does not come on the backs of the Roman Empire. It comes from the cross of Jesus Christ. Peace is Jesus Himself. Verse 14, notice that. He Himself is our peace. There's a little bit of a poetic nature to that. But guys, he's not saying what Jesus did, although that is what He's saying, okay? That's not the words He uses, though. So it's not just simply saying Jesus did these things and made peace happen. Again, that's the point of the verse, sure. But Jesus is the epitome. Jesus is peace personified. Can you think of other places that talk about God being personified in such a way? A few weeks ago in 1 John 4, God is love. Guys, it's the same concept. God is the originator of love. He is the source of love. He is the epitome of love. Peace is what Jesus is. Jesus brings peace. He gives peace. He bestows peace. He secures peace. He ensures peace. I'm running out of adverbs here and adjectives, but you get my drift here. That's what Jesus does. Now He's going to explain what that really means. He is our peace. He has made both one. He has made both one. That's a little confusing statement until He explains what He says. Okay, but He's made both one. He has broken down the middle wall of division between us. Now, in a few verses, we spent a little time on this a second ago, but in a few verses He's going to say, verse 21, we're a holy temple in the Lord. Okay, so a handful of verses before that, He's saying Jesus tore down the wall of division between us. What sort of image is that bringing to your mind? You remember around the temple. Actually, there were layers of walls in the temple complex, wasn't there? Inside the temple, there was the veil that separated the most holy place from the rest of the temple, right? And then you would go out of the temple, and there was a courtyard. And then you would go out of that courtyard, and there was another courtyard. And then you would go out of that courtyard. And then you finally had the temple of the Gentiles, or the courtyard of the Gentiles, where all the Gentiles could go. This is a place where Jesus runs out the money changers, okay, in John 2. Jesus created peace by destroying all the divisionary walls between God and His people. But that's not what He's talking about just yet. Now, that's part of what He did. But right here He's saying not necessarily the peace between God and man. That's going to come up in the next couple of verses. But here He's saying the peace between humanity. There were two classes of people, those near God, those far away from God. And what Jesus did was tore down everything that separated them. He made it to where people both near and far could come into the very presence of God. Maybe some Hebrews stuff is coming to your mind now. We can boldly approach His throne of grace. Guys, we can boldly approach His throne of grace because Jesus Christ made peace a reality for the Christian. You cannot approach the throne of grace without Jesus because you have nothing to approach it with. But through Jesus you can. Okay? Look at verse 14 again. He's broken down the middle wall of division. Now that word's important because verse 15, he's going to use a synonym to it. Having abolished in His flesh the enmity. So we've got division and enmity. All of this chaos, this animosity between classes was the reality of the human experience until Jesus comes along and makes being in God's presence a possibility, nay, a reality, and being in God's presence with God's people a reality. We've made the point, you think about the eunuch in Ethiopia in Acts chapter 8, making the journey to Jerusalem to worship God. When he gets to Jerusalem, folks, he travels upwards of 700 or 800 miles. When he gets to Jerusalem to worship God, he is not welcomed in past the court of the Gentiles. And there's some debate about whether he would even be welcomed into the court of the Gentiles because he was a eunuch. He could not draw near to God. He was a eunuch. He was a Gentile. Well, probably a Gentile. He may have been a converted Jew or a converted Gentile. But you see my point. What Jesus did is abolish this. So verse 15, He abolished in His flesh the enmity. That enmity, here it is, the law of commandments contained in ordinances. Now, it's not that Jesus just cast aside the entire law, but as Colossians 2 talks about, what He did was He nailed the law to the cross. This is why we don't have animal sacrifices. This is why we don't burn incense. This is why we don't travel to the temple every year or 3 times a year. This is why we don't do any of those things, because what Jesus did was do away with those things. This was part of how He was going to make peace between peoples. Okay? One of the preeminent areas where this would happen is one of the hot button issues of the first century. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? What was the number one issue in the first century between Gentile converts and Jewish converts? Starts with a C. Circumcision. I couldn't spell it, so that was all you were getting, okay? C-E-R-U-L-M-N-O-P. Circumcision, exactly. But part of what Jesus did in creating peace was doing away with things like circumcision because they were no longer a requirement of God's new covenant. Okay? So He creates peace when He abolished this in His flesh, the enmity, that is the law of commandments, contained in ordinances. So He's doing all of these things so as, look at the very end of verse 15, so as to create in Himself one new man from the two, thus making peace. So what Jesus does is creates in Himself. Now, I don't think that that's a geographical thing, okay? That doesn't make any logical sense. But what He does is brings people together into a relationship with Him, into a relationship with God the Father through Jesus Christ, and now these people can be part of the one body, the one new man. And what is that? The one new body, the one, Christians, the church. Ephesians chapter 1. Okay, He's put all things under His feet, which is His body, the church. Guys, make sure you kind of see that. That's part of what He's talking about here. He's putting all of these people together, creating peace by bringing them together in Him. You know, once in a while you'll have that discussion question. Somebody will say, well, the Church of Christers, you guys think you're the only ones going to heaven. Think you got to be in the Church of Christ to go to heaven. I'm like, okay, well, if you mean a denomination, yeah, we're not talking about the same thing. But if we're talking about New Testament Christianity, you've got to be in the Church of Christ to be saved. You know how I know that? Because he just said he's making one new man, one body, the church, singular, one group of people, that is one body of saved individuals, okay? That means everybody not in that one body is not saved. It can't get any plainer, folks, okay? We're not talking about denominations. We're talking about the one true church as revealed in Scripture. That's how you get peace with God, is by being right with Jesus Christ and part of that one new man, the body of Christ. Okay, verse 16. Notice this continues. Yours may have a little bit of a break, may have a period in there, but the thought continues, verse 16. And that he might restore or reconcile them both to God in one body by the cross, by it having put to death the enmity. So what Jesus does is twofold. This is what I was referring to a second ago. He creates peace horizontally and vertically. He creates peace between peoples, both Jew and Gentile, not separated now by the law anymore, brought together into one new man, the body of Jesus Christ. And when he does that, he creates peace between humanity and God the Father. What that's described as in verse 16 is reconciliation. Big, long biblical word, meaning restored to what it should be. That's what reconciled means. Restored to what should be. That's what Jesus does when he makes peace. When he creates peace, he does it efficiently. Notice, even in the English, this is really neat. You can see the pattern of repetition. So, back up in verse 14, just see these little words pop up. So he has made both one, verse 15, so that he could create in himself one new man from the two. Verse 16, that he might reconcile them both to God in one body by the cross. You see what he's doing? It's almost as if subconsciously, I don't think Paul's doing this subconsciously, but I think you as a reader should pick up on it subconsciously, if not consciously. He's saying there should be one, there is two, there's two. Jesus fixes it, makes it one. There's one body. Only one body that's reconciled to God, only one body that's restored to the proper relationship with God the Father, and that's all those who come through the cross. All those who come through the cross. So, I'm going to ask the T-ball question here. What's the cross a reference to? Don't overthink it. I wasn't being sarcastic. I mean, this is the T-ball question. What's the cross a reference to? I'm hearing the whispers. Jesus' death, his cross, his death. Now, here's what I want you to notice, and this is kind of carefully noticed, but notice it nonetheless. The cross was not the totality of what Jesus did, was it? But the cross is like the most vivid part of what Jesus did. See, when Jesus died on the cross, what did they then do with his body? What did they do with Jesus' body when he died on the cross? They buried it. I'm the tired one, guys. Y'all are supposed to be the snappy ones. Come on. So they buried it. Then what happened in 3 days? It was raised from the dead. He was raised from the dead. Resurrected. Okay? You need all of those components to have the gospel. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians 15, by the way. You need all of those components to actually have the gospel. If Jesus had died on the cross but had not been raised from the dead, we would not have the Messiah, Jesus Christ. We would have the fraud, Jesus of Nazareth. But the fact that he came back from the dead proved everything he said leading up to his death, validates the message, authenticates everything that he did, and what we have now is the resurrected, glorified Lord. That's Peter's sermon in Acts 2, folks. So the cross is just a poetic reference to what Jesus does, what Jesus did. Okay? So through Jesus, and by the way, could Paul have picked a more graphic piece of Jesus' life to refer to? You think that's purposeful? You think that's intentional? He's sitting here talking about enmity and division, and what does Paul say? He talks about the most graphic, nastiest part of Jesus' life. There were lots of parts of Jesus' life where there was no apparent enmity. How long did he preach before there was animosity against him? Well, not very long, okay? But you get my point. What Paul says, this is part of the poetic nature of the New Testament, what Paul says, through the nastiest, graphic, vilest part of Jesus' life, God made peace. You guys see that? Because this is what God can do. Only God could do that. Make peace out of something so nasty. And yet that's what He does. Through the cross of Jesus Christ, He puts to death the enmity. Do you see that? See now a little bit of the poetic spot of that verse? Jesus was put to death. Not just Jesus, guys. Jesus was put to death, absolutely. He died on the cross. But so did enmity. So did that division that separates Gentiles and Jews. So did that animosity between Creator and creation. When Jesus died, when He was put to death, God put to death all those other things too. Okay? Well, there's a lot of things working in that verse. But just kind of slow down once in a while and think through some of that. It is worth your time. Verse 17. And He came and preached peace to you who were afar off and to those who were near. Well, as you could probably guess, that's a pretty debated verse. The meaning of it is anyways, because Jesus died, was resurrected. Okay, some of that stuff's verses 14, 15, and 16. So verse 17, He came and preached peace to you. Either that is a reference to Jesus literally preaching peace to the people before His death, burial, and resurrection, or there's a little bit of a poetic nature to it, and Paul is saying He preached peace to these people, though He did not literally Himself preach peace. So maybe we would say through the preaching of the gospel, in that sense, then Jesus preached peace to these people. Okay? He's going to say in chapter 4 of Ephesians that you have not so learned Christ. Well, what is he talking about? Well, he's talking about the way these people are living. To truly learn Christ means you're going to live like the new creation God designed you to be. That's the whole context of Ephesians 4. Okay? So I think you could probably take the latter, is my suspicion on this. Paul is preaching Jesus. And through the preaching of Paul's lips, Jesus Himself is being preached. Does that make sense? I get up and preach on Sunday. There is a sense in which Jesus is preaching to you. It's not me, but I'm getting up and reading His book. I'm getting up and reading His words. And in that sense, Jesus is being preached to you. Jesus is preaching to you. Okay? All right, verse 18. Verse 18, for through Him we both have access by one Spirit to the Father. So through Jesus, we both, that is, no matter which side of the tracks you come from, Gentiles or Jews, they didn't have tracks, but either side of the tracks you come from, doesn't matter, through Jesus, we all have access. Notice the language though, we have access by one Spirit to the Father. This is what all of the Jews were looking for throughout the entire sacrificial system of the Old Testament, access to God. They would bring a plethora of sacrifices to have access granted to them to God, but it was a limited access. Only the priest could go into the tabernacle, later the temple. Only the high priest could go into the most holy place once a year, temple or tabernacle, take your pick. But through Jesus Christ, folks, what we have is complete access to God. This is why the Hebrew writer says we can approach His throne of grace boldly. Okay? Because of what Jesus did. We have access to the Father. Notice this, through Him, that's Jesus, by one Spirit, the Spirit of God, to the Father. Three persons of the Godhead right there. Okay? I'm going to make a point on that in just a second if we have time. So verse 19. Now therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God. So notice, you're not this anymore, now you're this. Isn't that what he did in verses 12 and 13? So verse 12, you were at this time without Christ, aliens, commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenants of promise. You had no hope. You were without God in the world. But verse 13, but now in Christ. You had this, but now you have this. That's what he does in verse 19. You were this, but not anymore. You were strangers and foreigners. The idea of strangers and foreigners is that you were not welcomed. You were an unwanted guest. You didn't belong here. You had no right to be here. Well, that's a very bleak picture, isn't it? But no longer is that the case. So now, you're fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God. So the idea is almost like you went from way out there, but now you're right here very, very close. Is that part of what he's been saying in Ephesians 2, though? Those who were brought near by the blood of Christ? Guys, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the fact that you don't belong here, and yet God, through Jesus Christ, says, I want you right here at my feet. Got no right to be there, but that's where God wants you, and through Jesus Christ, that's where you can be. Okay? Each one of those terms carries a particular meaning that's really worth exploring, but we don't really have time. I just want you to notice this. It's as if it gets more intimate with each term. Fellow citizens, saints, and then third, part of the household of God. So it's almost as if it's like we went from being welcomed inside the city walls as part of the citizenry, to welcomed into the closer confines, being saints. I'm not saying there's different categories of Christians, okay? But he concludes with part of the household of God. It's a very intimate place, a very special place. It's part of what we have by virtue of our access to God through Jesus Christ. And all of those really important phrases can be fleshed out right there. Verse 20. And having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. So the imagery is of maybe a city built on foundations. A foundation of the apostles and prophets, the teaching and preaching of God's men, God's people who were telling the world about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Individuals going about telling everybody about Jesus and the work of the Messiah. This is the bedrock of the church. This is the bedrock of God's people. This is who we are and what we are. And he says Jesus himself being the chief cornerstone. The chief cornerstone, there's lots of ways to probably take that. But I think we all really see that image, don't we? You go to lay a rock foundation, which we don't do rock foundations anymore. We do concrete. But even in concrete, you start with squaring the 2x4s or 2x12s generally. You start by squaring those boards in the first corner. Because if those boards aren't square, nothing on the entire structure will be. Okay? It was the same in the ancient world. You took the bricks or the rocks and you got the first one set square. If it was off, everything else would be off. I've built many retaining walls. They're the worst. I hate them, and if you ask me to do it for you, I will say no. I will find another way to serve you as my siblings in the faith, but that will not be it. This exact process is how those things are built. Those big retaining walls you sometimes see along the interstate. You set the first one square, and then you use it as the guide to set the others. By the way, it's the same thing they do with these squares on our floor right now. It's the same thing when you do tile. It's the same way of tile. Whatever you set first, if it's wrong, the rest of them are wrong. That's why Jesus himself, this is why Paul's emphasizing this, Jesus Christ himself is the chief cornerstone, because he is the guide by which every other stone is laid. Okay, he is the standard. So all of that connects together. This is part of the fellow citizenry, this is part of the saint, this is part of the household of God, this is part of being built like we should be, is using Jesus Christ as our guide. Verse 21. In whom the whole building, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together for a habitation of God in the Spirit. Verse 21 The whole building is joined together. You look at a structure, each component of the structure is woven into the fabric of the building itself. You can't separate different aspects of the building and still have the building. This is really important image because you're talking about the building is almost like, well, we're thinking in non-human terms and maybe tough for us to relate. But you go read Romans 12 and start talking about the body. And each body, the body has its individual members, and yet we're members of one another, and we're working together. And 1 Corinthians 12 uses this same image. Romans 6 uses this same image. All of these are really, really important, but don't miss this one saying the same thing in a different way. We're part of this building, being joined together, being built up. He's going to say that again in different words in chapter 4, isn't he? In verses 11 and following. That this edifice, this structure, was given by the grace of God offices to help it grow up, to mature and develop and be what it should be. Okay? Go read Ephesians 4:11 through 16. It's probably one of the most heavy sections in all the book of Ephesians, but this is what it's saying. It's saying the same thing. He just said it here in 2 words. Whole building being joined together. So we're being joined together. Joined together. That's what this building is all about. That's who we are as God's people. So this grows into a holy temple in the Lord. I'm not going to reiterate any of those points we made a moment ago, but every one of them is correct. A place of God's residence, a place of worship, a place of service and sacrifice, a place of holiness. That's exactly what we are supposed to be. If you think being a Christian is about showing up, you have got it wrong. Being a Christian is about serving God and serving God's people. It's about worshiping God. It's about helping others worship God. Christians are workers, guys. If you're not working, you're not very good at being a Christian. Okay? Because that's what we are. We're workers. We're joining ourselves together, helping to grow into what we should be. Verse 22. And so he says, in whom you also are being built together. Second time in 2 verses, guys, he says we're built, or 3 verses, that we're being built together. Built together for a habitation of God in the Spirit. The temple of the old world was the place where people looked at to see God. And this was true even in the pagan world. When you went into the city of Ephesus, remember the temple of Artemis, we talked about this incredible structure, larger than the Greek Parthenon. That's where they looked when they wanted to see Artemis. That's where they went when they wanted to see Artemis. Guys, it's no different for the Christians today. We are the place where God dwells. When people want to see God, they should look at us. Wow, that fits really well with Russ's lesson Sunday night. Lights of the world, right? When people want to see God, they should be able to look at Christians and see God. And Russ read several of those verses that deal with this issue in the lesson Sunday night. But this is exactly what it's talking about. We are the habitation for God in the Spirit. Okay? And don't get all mythological or crazy in some of that, because it's really pretty, it's really beautiful. Just leave it alone. All right? Questions on any of that? Okay, I took up all of our time, so if you have some applications, now would be the time to say them, and you might say them quicker than normal because you're not going to have a lot of time to say very many. So what are some ways we can apply these verses? Will help us go out there and live them. Now don't sit there and think, he's going to let all the time run out, and then he's going to end up just writing down his, so I'm going to sit here and not say nothing. Because I'll tell you what I'll do then. I'll scribble so fast you can't keep up. So what are some ways we can apply this? I'm not letting you off the hook on this one. Without Christ, there is no peace. Okay? Give me one more. One more. I'm going to lay this one in your lap. Access to God as depicted in that text. Was that easy? Or did that come at a great cost? Great cost. Okay. So it's very costly for us to have gained access to the Father, right? What should that make us do with that information? Respect it, honor it, appreciate it. Do you appreciate being able to pray to God like you do? Do you appreciate that? That you have access to the Father through the Spirit because of what Jesus Christ did? And I'm going to give you another one. I'm going to softball it to you. Y'all got to work on this. You got to work on these applications, because this is what we're trying to get out of this, isn't it? Through that section, what he describes are outcasts. You're foreigners. You're nobodies. You're nothings. Okay, even back up in verse 12. You were strangers to the covenants of promise. You had nothing. You were outcasts. But now, verse 19, you're part of the household of God. You're part of God's family. Do you stop and appreciate that like you should? That we're part of a family here. This is a family. This is God's family. So maybe some very, very pointed applications for that then. I need to help my family. I need to be praying for my family. I need to be showing up and encouraging my family. I need to be supporting my family. I need to be patient with my family. And there's going to be a couple of times where I'm going to want to knuckles a couple of my family members, because that's what I did with my brothers too. But I've always got your back, like you've always got my back. I literally heard a preacher say, I can rough him up, I can put him on the ground, and I can make him yelp, and I can make him cry, and I can make him hurt, but if you lay your hand on him, I'm fighting you. Isn't that the way you are with your own siblings? Oh man, I can't do that with my younger brother. Dylan is 6'4" and 250 pounds. Ex-Army, served like 9 years in the military. I don't even want to look at him half the time because I'm afraid his frown would knock me out. Now, my older brother is out of shape, a little shorter than me. I could whip him, But you know what I'm talking about. Who do you have that I can count on these people? Well, this is the family, guys. I actually had a lot more applications, but you're not getting them now. So we'll work on that next section on Sunday. I appreciate your attention tonight.